And so I'm joined by Chris Robertshaw, our political commentator. We're going back to the Dr Ranson Tribunal, which concluded on Friday, and we had this discussion. I couldn't be there for it, so we've kept this back to now. I haven't heard much about it until now, so I thought we'd let you give it to me full, and I can soak it in, because obviously this was this sort of wrapping up, wasn't it, from both sides, with their specialists who came in, basically, I suppose, to try and determine where the money is going to go and how much it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, for those who aren't familiar with this, perhaps we should say that the tribunal has already long since produced its decision, which fell very, very heavily in Dr Ranson's favour. This hearing last week, Monday, Tuesday and Friday, as you say, was all about remedy. And on Friday, the one you weren't able to attend, we heard the wrapping up. And the skeletal element of this remedy section of the tribunal's work focused on the what's called the closing submissions of both parties, which, of course, as members of the public, we haven't seen. We're just able to interpret the mood by what we heard on the Friday. And if I was to try and give an assessment of how it felt in the room on the Friday, I would say that the claimants, that's Dr Ranson's team, the claimants, KC, King's Counsel, was forensic in his commentary. And I linked two words together which don't normally sit together in my final thoughts about, well, how did that sound? He was actually quite scathing, and yet he did it courteously. So
scathing about the government's...
Scathing about his criticism of the defendant's position as it has emerged right the way through the whole process. So I don't know what Casey Siegel will think of if he cares, the comment that I found him courteously scathing, but very critical. The respondents, King's Counsel, was right through defensive. It looked like an organisation on retreat and trying to ameliorate the damage. I think that's it. So the points, the main points, I think you'll remember from Monday and Tuesday, is that they were focused on apart from the actual submissions themselves. What was discussed was pension rights, mental health.
It's the ability for Dr Ranson to work again, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah, yes. Let's sort of go through this methodically, if you don't mind, Paul.
Sure.
They discussed exemplary damages. The Expel report came up again, and costs. So if we can just whiz through those. On the pension rights, the presentation by the Rosalind Ranson side was led by, I think the chap's name was Mr. Taverner, but he was an actuary, a full-blown experienced actuary, was very clear in his presentation, where, strangely, the defendant's assessment of the pension rights that Rosalind Ranson might enjoy in the future was led by an accountant, and that was strange because we were very much in actuarial area of interest here, and the actuary from the claimant's side was very clear. Then the other area was mental health, and we heard there from the claimant's side, we heard from Professor, I think his name was Professor Elliott. He was very comprehensive and very clear, whereas the respondent's specialist, psychologist, came over to me from a subjective point of view as quite weak and clumsy. For example, when he started his submission, he actually couldn't get Rosalind Ranson's name correct even. He called her something else. And it had that sort of vagueness about it, whereas the claimant's side was very clear. Then we went on to exemplary damages, and perhaps I could read out what I understand the exemplary damages are. Mm. And it's very particular and worthy of discussion. This exemplary damages may be available for oppressive, arbitrary or unconstitutional action by servants of government, and actually acts as a form of punishment. And the case for exemplary damages appears to me to be very strong indeed. And what was interesting about the respondents' side, that's the government side, was that they weren't clearly saying we do not think there should be exemplary damages. What they seemed to be saying was, well, if you're going to apply exemplary damages, please keep it right down to as low a figure as possible. And that to me indicates an acceptance of predetermined guilt.
So sort of holding their hands up, but just saying, don't
be horrible,
don't go mad.
And I think that, and he used some rather unusual precedents to argue why it should only be £4,000. Yeah,
They could be talking millions here. Let's face it.
I don't think you can go that high.
Oh, right. Okay.
No, I don't think you can. But what they were, I think, hoping for is that if the tribunal levels a low figure of exemplary damages against government as a punishment, that somehow they can say, oh, well, you know, never mind, 4,000. It was just a little mistake,
a little
slap. No, I absolutely don't accept that at all. And part of the argument, as I understand it, with regard to exemplary damages, and there was a whole list of issues, and we know, don't we, already, and the public know that there was a collapse in the senior leaders in government as a consequence of the tribunal's original ruling, where we saw, you know, the exit door very, very busy indeed, and a lot of senior people disappearing. What I don't think has been focused on enough is the AG's poor performance, and it's worse than poor performance in my mind. If you look, and they, to my mind, they should be linked into the exemplary damages. They put forward two really stupid and ridiculous appeals. Which,
in your view?
In my view. Well, that's what you're listening to me for.
I'm just
hope.
covering myself. And also, I mean, well, yeah, carry on. Yeah. Go with this.
Well, all right. Well, what else can you call an appeal when both sides in the courtroom say, well, we don't know why we're here? I'm sorry, Paul, that's stupid and ridiculous.
Right.
And incidentally, talking about costs, very expensive as well. Then we had, if you remember, missing documents, late submissions. The AG's fingerprints are all over this. And I at that time, the AGs were the solicitor, as it were, representing the DHSC. And I just want to here reference what a solicitor's role is. In other words, what the AG's role was as the tribunal in its original phase was dealing with. And a solicitor's duty is to investigate the position carefully and to ensure, so far as possible, a full and proper disclosure of all documents is made. The duty owed to the court is one which the administration of justice very greatly depends upon. Now, it's clear to me that there was a complete failure on the part of AGs to fulfil their duties. And there's, by example, we don't want to go over all of them, we can't, but one I want to particularly draw to your attention, Paul, is that, do you recall that the applicant, the claimant, Dr Ranson's side, originally required a number of senior government people to produce affidavits? Do you remember that? Do you also remember that Will Greenhow was written to and was required to produce an affidavit, and he didn't, and neither did he produce an affidavit or turn up in the tribunal itself. But a representative from the AGs turned up and sat there the whole of the morning, and when it came to the point the tribunal was seeking either the affidavit from the then Chief Secretary or his presence to answer questions that were going to be directed towards him, the AGs then said, oh, he won't be attending and he won't produce an affidavit, because the AGs said the affidavit was addressed to Mr Will Greenhow and not the Chief Secretary. So on sort of some pathetic technicality, the Chief Secretary's role in all of this was going to be completely removed. enjoying the full and complete support of the AG's department. Now, let's remember that the AG's department, the AG is a Crown appointment. We've just heard very recently that the Solicitor General is also, the new appointment, Solicitor General is also a Crown appointment. Now, surely the concept of a Crown appointment with regard to the AGs means that the conduct and behaviour of the AG's department must be of the highest possible standard. And yet here we've seen exhibited time and time again on the part of the AG's department miserable and poor behaviour.
And let me butt in there a bit,
Yeah.
because the AGs, or whatever, should be doing it for the good of the Isle of Man, right? For Isle of Man PLC, not to help any particular person working in a department who needs a little assistance, maybe to wriggle slightly.
I think, well, another way of putting it would be that it's very important that the people of the Isle of Man can trust the AG's department.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's any longer possible. If we go back a whole decade, there was a report done on the AG's department by Wooler, I think Steve Wooler. Now, as I recall it, that report was so scathing of the AG's department a decade ago that the full report never saw the light of day. That I think there was some form of executive summary that came out. I think it's time to pull that report out again, get it aired and have a look at, because I think there's still a huge amount that's wrong. Steve Wooler last year came back to review his own now 10-year-old report, and I had the opportunity to speak to him and said that I was very, very uncomfortable about a number of things, not least of which the fact that the prosecution service still sits inside the AG's department, which is not acceptable, and we've discussed that before, haven't we? So it's really beyond time now that the AG's department became an asset to the greater good for the people of the Isle of Man, and not this horrible vindictive organisation that seems to think that it can arrogantly apply its will and taxpayers' money wherever it wants in order to pursue its particular interests without recourse to being in any shape or form accountable.
I mean, I suppose the question is, can the AG, as it goes on, be okay, or does it need a new fresh broom even now after all this to really look into all the cracks and crevices like we're hearing about? But can we do that next part?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have a part 2 of this.